Hey, everybody. Welcome to another How to Succeed podcast. This is How to Succeed at Having ROI Conversations with our Sandler trainer from New York, Rich Chiarello. And I'm your host, Mike Montague. I am head of franchise strategy at Sandler. And if you haven't listened to this podcast before, or if you haven't hit subscribe yet, do that. We do this weekly show helping people get to the top and stay there. If you want more information on Sandler, go to sandler.com. Ton of free resources, live and virtual training events. You can check out the recordings from the Sandler Summit, all kinds of good things. If you go to sandler.com and click on the Insights tab. All right, here we go. It's How to Succeed at Having ROI Conversations with Rich Chiarello. Rich, welcome to the podcast. Tell me a little bit about the ROI conversation. And I guess this is the intellectual justification of why somebody would buy, right?
Well, it could be that way. It's going back to when I first started in sales. We're going back decades. When I first went to work for an industry giant at the time, IBM, the first thing they did for what we would call now attitude is set a mindset in our heads, which was people don't buy from IBM because we have the best technology. People don't buy from us because we're the lowest price. People buy from us for two reasons. Number one, we find a business problem that has a value in being solved. And then number two, they believe that if they spend the money with us, we will solve that problem, right? So that's the mindset you have to have. And it kind of, especially if you're in the technology space, it kind of moves your thought away from selling features into the technologists and the technocrats and more towards on a scavenger hunt for people who have big problems that you can solve. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I like that a lot. And there's so much to unpack here with Sandler stuff because we do have the emotional versus the intellectual. But I love what you even set up for us there with the confidence. I mean, we have to have a problem big enough to solve that it makes sense for them to invest anything in it or spend any time thinking about it. And we also have to have their confidence that we can and will solve the problem, right? So I know you've been a Sandler trainer for a long time. We can take a shortcut. Our audience might need to catch up with us. But I always think about those like pains in the future or pleasure in the future type of sales where they have to really believe that that's going to pay off, right? Especially if it's a long-term investment. Those are tricky conversations on ROI if that ROI is stretched out, 3 years or more.
Well, there's two types of things you can sell. There's ones that have pain in the present, right? So even within the technology space, you're selling, whether it's AI or some other technical solution that will increase revenue or decrease expenses in what's happening today. Then you have a whole other set of products like security, malware protection, life insurance, car insurance. Those are things that we can't justify with expenses today. They're cost avoidances, right? Even there, with the proper Sandler approach, you can identify a likely cost that you are avoiding. But again, that only works if you have stayed in the personal pain state long enough for this person to sweat the bullets over, boy, if that happened and we had to spend that kind of money, I'd be gone. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and you mentioned selling technology. You wrote the book for Sandler. I probably should have mentioned that too, selling technology the Sandler way. So there's a lot we can unpack in there too, but I wanted to make sure we got your credibility and expertise in on that one. Let's start with the attitude part and dive a little bit deeper here because I do think there's something more here about in sales where people mess this up. In calculating ROI, maybe they use their numbers instead of the clients, or maybe they don't even have the ROI conversation, or they assume that the buyer is going to do it on their side. There's lots of different weird things that can happen. What do you see as some of the common myths or misconceptions about this ROI conversation?
Well, usually what we find is the value proposition that a salesperson believes they offer is the wrong one. So what do I mean by that? Whatever it is you're selling, let's say you've been doing it for 2 years. You're selling to people in the industry side, on the consumption side, who are experts in that technology for 10 or 15 years. Or you're going to go talk about business outcomes to C-level people who've been doing it for years. And so your attitude is always one of, why would they want to talk to me? I'm not an expert in this technology. And so if I were them, I wouldn't want to talk to me. So usually the first session we have is convert that. Your real value proposition as a salesperson, regardless of what you're selling to a prospect, is your knowledge of the sales process. and that today 90+% of B2B transactions end in a no decision. And so when you believe that your knowledge, what you bring to the client, is your knowledge of a sales process, what would need to take place for them to actually buy something, then you can convince them that that has to start with, what business problem will we solve? And after all, since you do that every day, that is your expertise.
Mm-hmm. And what about, I guess that goes deeper in there too, with equal business stature and stuff. Can you tell us a little bit about the positioning? Obviously, we have some complementary frameworks and things out there about intellectual justifications or different decision makers and or end users in this sort of decision making process. When you're talking about having this ROI conversation, is that at the very top?
That's how you should frame your mindset, even with the very first discovery. And so it's what I call ROI sequencing. So, a typical sales process for people is a lead comes in, or you prospect, you have a discovery call, maybe go back if it's still alive and you do a demo to deeper into your product. If it's still hot and alive and you're both interested, maybe then you do a custom demo. And then some technologies will actually go to that next step of doing something they call a proof of concept. All of that is based upon technical features and speeds and trying to show off your wares. So ROI sequencing is much different. It starts with, let me share with you what you need to know about this since I do this for a living. Unless we find a big business problem we can solve that's 5x of the investment, and unless we can find a department who's willing to fund it, you and I might waste the next 6 to 9 months. You get your team all excited, and then it finds out later on that they can't justify it, or the money will be spent on something else in your company. I would be doing sales malpractice if I allowed that to happen. So the first thing we have to do is figure out, what is the business problem we can solve? And if not you, who else has a personal stake in solving it? And then every step, Mike, from that point on is a further granularization, crystallization of meeting of the minds between us, the vendor, and then the customer. What exactly would that business outcome look like that, if you knew we could give it, would justify you spending the money? And if we ever do anything that they call today a proof of concept, where they actually touch the software and use it, that is typically now called a proof of value. And you'll actually get them to sign a contract ahead of time that says, listen, we're going to install the software, say, for 30 days. And here's the price that we've agreed on. At the end of 30 days, you have 2 choices. You can say, didn't do what you guys said it was going to do, take it out, or leave it in, and then you sign the agreement. All of that is based upon that initial conversation, which is, do you have a problem big enough that merits investing in our solution?
I like that a lot, and I think that might have already creeped us into the behavior bucket here of doing the right thing at the right time. But I heard a couple of things there, and I wanted to start with that end, which is the problem big enough. You kind of said 5 times the amount there is a good benchmark. I've heard lots of different numbers, but I think it is one of the more interesting challenges for salespeople to go through Sandler training, is to find a pain and a pain big enough, or how to know when it is big enough. Can you help us out on what we're looking for, what that sounds like, or how do we know if it's, if it's 3x, is that enough? What kind of, go, no go decisions would we have here on that?
That's a very good point. What you want to avoid is the good news, bad news. Good news is we like you and you won compared to the other vendors. Bad news is we have other things in the company we want to spend our money on. And so we're going to do that first. And so if you take something simple as a 3X, which says, hey, you're going to invest $100,000 this year in sales training, and over the next 12 months, will I get back 3X, $300,000? For that chief revenue officer, that might be great. That might be his or her best use of the money. But then it goes to a CFO, and the CFO goes like this: I don't believe anything. I'm going to cut the 3X in half. And then I have more people who want to spend more money in the company than I have money. So if I'm only going to get that type of return, is there someone else who can show me a more believable 4X, 5X, 6X return? So you have to remember, you're competing for that firm's money, not just against your competitors, but for other projects.
Yeah, that's a really big one. I can see that. And you missed one of my other favorites, which is instead of the 100 investment, we're going to invest 50, get none of the results, and then complain that you wasted the 50. So when you think of behavior, and I know you've already talked a lot about the sequencing and the discussions, does anything else come to mind? For me, I'm thinking about that these are obviously upfront conversations, right? We're starting with this before we do anything else. But how else do we make sure we're doing the right thing at the right time and in the right order here?
Well, you look at your sales steps, right? And we call it sales templating, right? So you look at each step and you basically ensure, based upon this approach, that there are certain things that the customer must do, a prospect, and you, the sales team, have to do in order to advance it through the sales cycle. So here's a clear example. Most technology companies have pre-sales engineers that do the demos and the more detailed dives. The first step that's inserted to make sure the behavior is okay is that as a systems engineer, if you ask me to do a demo, I'm looking for what was the business outcome they said they wanted to see in a demo that would make them spend the money with us, not go through an alphabetical order, all the features, and see if one lights their fire.
Right.
And so when you bring everybody in the team on board with that, it keeps everybody else honest, but it makes sure that the behaviors are all in sync with, hey, I'm looking for this. And the future asked question of, so if we showed you in a demo the feature that you think is needed or the outcome you think you need to bring in that amount of revenue, what happens next? If the answer is crickets chirping, and then we'll think about it, then based upon this value track, you need to stop the sales cycle because nothing's going to happen. If you found someone who has a real business problem and they have the personal pain associated with, the natural prospect behavior should be, well, if you show me that you can solve it and it's 5x to 1, then I'm going to go ahead and at the very least, go make sure that I request the money and try to spend it. Right. And then there's other actions you take with them to figure out, well, before we do that, maybe you should go and find out what is the hurdle rate you would need. Is it 5x, 6x or more? So we know how much pain we need to uncover if it makes sense to go forward, because you don't want to go forward and lose. No one wants to go to the CFO, ask for money and get turned down. Right.
And I think that's where we have some interesting things too. And I don't know how much you want to get into. Well, let's move to it. Sandler techniques and stuff here too, because bracketing comes to mind for me, and a few other techniques that I'm assuming if we have that 5x, 6x return, we're not getting penny pitched on the budget as much as if it's much closer. If it's 1.5 or 2x, then people start getting nervous and they'll start cutting that down a little bit. And we want to make sure that our ask is above what's actually needed. You mentioned, using all of the money, but we certainly don't want to use more than we asked for if we're trying to prove this ROI case. Is that right?
Well, it's the ROI is a formula. It's R, the return, over I, the invoice or the investment. So the first natural reaction of a salesperson is when someone flinches at it is to say, well, if I make the I smaller, then it will look better. How about going back and making the R bigger? And a common flaw we see in non-Sandler trained salespeople, as you know, is I don't like to talk about price. It scares people off. I keep it to the end. Then I surprise them with the price, hope they don't fall off, right? If you look at the approach we just outlined, your very first conversation is, listen, you're going to invest in us. Our solution is about 150 grand for XYZ company. In my experience, if we don't find 5x that, 750 to $1 million in recurring expenses, it's going to get shut down, either as not being enough to distract the IT department, or we have other sources that we'd like to spend that money with. So it makes sense that for us to proceed, we have to think about what type of outcome could deliver that for your company and then get them talking about it. But you've stated up front what the price is. At the end for them to say, well, now can you lower the price? That just means you didn't find enough R along the way. You have to have a mindset, which is the price is the price. It makes sense whether you have enough return or not. Not everyone is a prospect for your solution.
You've been nailing it so far, so I'm going to give you the hard one. The one that I find difficult in the technique sometimes is actually getting their numbers. We need them to do some homework on their side, or one person in the deal gives us a number and then everybody else is debating their number. Like you said, the CFO comes in and goes, well, sure, the project manager or whatever thinks he needs twice the budget, but he really doesn't. And they start going back and forth. I have a hard time locking in on a number that everybody believes is true sometimes. What do we do in that case? Or they won't go, or they don't know their number for the return, right? Because we're guessing at a solution they've never implemented before.
The fallacy is that if there isn't a budget established in this day and age, then there's no way you're going to sell something. And the issue is, I've been selling sales training now for 15 years. I never once showed up to a prospect and introduced myself and them said, thank God you're here. Rich, I've had $100,000 all year in my budget for sales training, and I had no idea who I was going to spend it with. Thank God you showed up. When you solve real business problems and you're talking to the person who is a C-level executive who has a KPI based upon that, they go find the money. Now, as we all know, there's two types of budgets when it comes to ROI. We won't get into that today. But sales training and most software as a service falls under a expense budget. Hardware and some of the items fall under capital. It's 50-50 right now, public companies, that when they look at, say, if you're selling software as a service or anything as a service, payments over a year, most of them will expense that. So the first thing you have to ask someone is, when you say you don't have any budget, which budget are you talking about? Because for most C-level executives, the way they justify sales training is an expense. I can delay hiring people. I can spend a little bit less on marketing. And as long as my expense numbers come out the same, cut back a little on travel. And so if you understand that, then you could have more meaningful conversations at the C-level. But first, you have to get the C-level person to say, I need this to make my KPIs happen, because that's how they're paid.
Yeah, I love that. And I think depending on what you're selling, you can have some really fun ROI conversations. I think the one that I remember working with the most, and they've done a lot of Sandler training, is expense reduction analysts, where they just take a piece of the savings and go, no, we don't need a budget for this at all. You can pay us 25% of what we save you in the first year, or whatever the percentage is. I forget now. And that's an interesting way to have this conversation. I think there's a lot of ways to get creative with the budget, or for them to get creative with the budget, if we really are solving a problem, and if they really are going to save time, money, and energy on their side, right? I guess that takes us back to where we were talking about with pains, but I see so many times, especially in software technology sales, where we're making an expense here on technology, but we might be saving, several full-time equivalents, which, don't necessarily translate in the right budget buckets or things there, but it could make a huge difference.
Right. So you get into the next thing, which is depending on the cost of what you're selling and the variables, how much installation cost there is, maybe training, maybe there's some hardware needed. There are some very good ROI calculators you can download and get accustomed with. Because here's the thing. Most people look at, hey, it's $300,000. You want me to invest $100,000, and how soon is payback? So even if you can show them payback in 12 months is what they're all looking for. The issue is the ongoing benefits. Most of your costs are upfront, whether you're selling software, hardware, or training. But the ongoing benefits accrue and get bigger over time. So you're doing yourself a disservice by looking at only a 12-month window. You want to show, here's the cost you would have had. You were going to hire 3 more people. They were in your budget with benefits. Here's each person is $120,000 in IT. Here's what that would have looked like over 5 years. Now you didn't hire them. You spent money with us up front and just maintenance in years 2 and 3. So the ability to look at the full 5-year cost trade-off is where you get the large ROI. The second thing you brought up is the more that you do this, the more you feel comfortable as being a consultant in ROI, right? Once you do this enough, I still remember my training from IBM, right, many years ago, you know that you can tell someone, listen, you just bought a company and now you need more licenses from us. You realize you have a 90-day period where you can take those licenses and put it into a one-time fee and not report it as expenses. If you miss that 90-day window and you need them after that, then you'll have to have them as expenses against your profit. But every company is allowed to take things like layoffs, closing of leases, hardware, software needed as a result of either an acquisition or a spinoff, and put it into a one-time fee separate from their P&L. So if you know that and you can tell someone about that who wasn't aware of it, all of a sudden you're that valued consultant.
Yeah, that's amazing and really great stuff. Now we're really getting deep that we haven't done on this podcast before. So I'll just ask you one last question, which is anything else I should have asked or that you were hoping to share today before we wrap up?
No, I think the key thing is, like most things in sales, it's easier than you think. A lot of people hear ROI, hear what I said, and they're like, oh my God, sounds like I'm going back to school. I was never good in math. Like most things, if you learned the technology you're selling, then you can certainly learn how to be a relative expert as it relates to ROI for selling your product. And like most things, even if you fumble the first one, it still is better than probably what that prospect has seen from any other salesperson. And you just get better and better at it. So don't be afraid, jump in.
I love that. And my big takeaway was if you learn one thing, learn that lifetime value math there that, if we just use our sales training example, it would say, oh, you spent 100,000, we're going to get 100,000 or 300,000 in sales this year. But typically most of our clients don't sell something one time and they're done. So if they keep that 300,000 in new revenue for the next 3 years, that's actually 900,000. And so the ROI gets exponentially greater the better we get at understanding their business model.
Well, sales training is a great one for that, because what happens to salespeople who don't succeed in the first 9 months with your company? The good ones leave, the bad ones you have to fire, right? So forget how much revenue you bring in as a result of the sales training. How about the reduction in turnover? If you cut your turnover in half or by 2/3, right, you would have had to hire those people next year and all of the recruiting fees, right, and disruption. So the more you're able to look at the benefits, like over a 5-year horizon, the sweeter your ROI typically will look.
Yeah, and I love that. And even, improving renewal rates and things too. Right. A lot of times people don't count that as new revenue, but it can be very impactful for especially profit margins. And so. Well,
listen, unless you only have one product, right? Most companies have many products. You can't buy my second product till you buy my first product. Right. Mm-hmm. So if I never sell you the first product, I'm never going to sell you the second. So you get into that compounded effect of better sales. And that's why there's so much focus in public companies on how many new labels did you sign, new companies. It's great that your existing customers love you, but you can't live just off of that. If you're constantly adding new logos, then that means they bought one product and all the other products you have can now be sold to them, right? And that makes a multiplier of your stock look cheap today compared to the future.
I love it. Once again, we've been talking with Rich Chiarello, a longtime Sandler trainer from New York and author of Selling Technology the Sandler Way. Check that out at shop.sandler.com or wherever you buy and read your books. Now, Rich, this is your first time on the podcast. I can't believe that, but I want to get to know you a little bit better here. At this point in your career, how do you define success for yourself?
Well, success for myself at this, having done, so many different things across my life, it's really about how many people, having done this now for 15 years, I look back at people who were BDRs and now heads of sales, right? It's really that little league coach who now is looking at people who are in the pros, right? You've really defined yourself, from my point of view, as, have you really helped people? Are people really better? And have they gone further? And when they talk to you after not speaking with you 5 or 10 years, do they shy away from you, or do they make a point of telling you, hey, because of you, I didn't give up sales, right? And so I think that's what every sales trainer kind of wants to look for. I would say as a salesperson, no matter what you're selling, years from now, when someone says, what was it like to buy from Mike Montague? Hey, bought from him at 3 different companies, 3 different products. One thing about Mike, he wasn't going to sell me something unless he knew it would help me in my job and wouldn't embarrass me or make me look bad to my boss. And so similar type of thing in sales training. You want to have that type of reputation. And that's what I'm looking to, like, when I go off into the sunset, that's what I'd like for people to think about me.
And I love this opposite question here. Was there a biggest failure, particular hard lesson learned, or some sort of hurdle you had to get over in order to be successful in your career?
Well, I guess the biggest hurdle I had to get over as a strong D was understanding that complex sales require lots of people to work and you can't do it all yourself. Then you become a manager of people and you're going to try to do the same thing all over again, be a super manager. They're not as good as me. And the time it takes to show you I can do it, that lasts for a little bit until you almost, have a heart attack. Then you're like, wait a second, I have to learn to be successful by guiding others. And that was the hardest lesson to learn. And really probably only learned it because there was no other choice.
Yeah. Definitely one you learn the hard way if you're one of those high performers driven type A personalities. What is your favorite Sandler concept or Sandler rule?
Well, to me, the favorite Sandler rule to me, or the concept, is personal pain. I think I've trained now for 15 years. Everyone who's an experienced salesperson seems to think they know something of it, right? But there's two things that they always, when they're done, say, hey, I've been selling, I didn't know about that. One is the upfront contract. But the other is that they all never really focus on personal pain. They thought their job was done when they found a business issue that needed to be solved, stopped going down what we know is our funnel, and went into sales mode, right? Even with my great training at IBM, they really did not go into personal motivators. Don't start selling till you find the people with the personal motivators and play that. And I consider them to have, one of the best sales training in the industry at the time. So to me, that would be my personal favorite of them all.
I love it. Thanks for being on the show. Again, you can find Sandler at sandler.com. A ton of free resources. In New York there. You can find offices all over the United States, Canada, and UK, and all around the world, 17 different languages, and I forget how many countries we're in now, but 30 plus. And we're here to help. We even got an international team. If you got one of those big enterprise level organizations, we'd love to talk to you there too. And of course, whatever you are, be a good one. Have a great week, everybody. Talk to you later.